Warm welcome to you, Mr. Eli, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My name is Eli.
Eli.
Sogbeye Eli.
Yes.
All right, welcome.
Thanks for.
Yes. Now, what do you make of this decision by the federal government to send the budget of Rivers State to the National Assembly? Is it a federal overreach or necessary intervention? Is President Tinubu's move justified, or is it a mini coup, as some have described it?
Well, I would, for the purpose of this conversation, limit myself to material facts. Bear in mind that the entire issue about the declaration of emergency rule is being contested in court by a lot of facts, a lot of suits. Just yesterday, we heard that the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court, Justice John Saul, had ordered that all of the actions against the emergency rule sitting in the Federal High Court in Port Harcourt Division be moved to the Abuja Division. So, to the extent that people are challenging the constitutionality or otherwise of the emergency rule in court, I'll be mindful not to make statements there to perpetrate otherwise. But as you recalled in the intro, on March 18 this year, the president declared the emergency rule over Rivers State and appointed a retired naval admiral, Ibaki Ete, to be administrator of the states, pursuant to the powers of the president under section 305 of the Constitution. So that's what we have at the moment. And at the moment, you also recall that the Supreme Court had, before that time, nullified the judgment delivered over the crisis in Rivers State, and nullified the budget that was presented to the National Assembly by the governor of the state, and now in suspension, SARS Finalai Joseph Obura. So as it stands, you want to say that the administrator is sitting on a zero budget system. So there have been hue and cry for the governor to return by citizens of the state across the political divide of sending voices for the governor. But the truth of the matter is that until the president calls for the emergency rule, until the court decides otherwise in the matters that are before the court, the administrator is here and he has to work on the budget. Now, recall also under our Constitution, Section 81 gives the president the power to lay budgets for the National Assembly, both House of the National Assembly, Senate and House of Reps, for that's federal budgets, Section 81. But again, the power to take over the function of the House of Assembly of the state, where it is unable to sit, is inherent in the National Assembly under our Constitution. So now that the House of Assembly too was suspended with the governor in the proclamation of emergency rule in Rivers State, it goes without saying that the president has no other place to lay the budget but before the same National Assembly. So I think that by and large, these are the issues that we have to deal with as facts. Like I said, the other controversies about whether or not it is right, constitutional or not, for the purpose of the argument, may not be convenient for me as a lawyer, but the matter is already sub judice.
Okay. Also, just to talk about the role, seeing as we currently do not have State House of Assembly that's functional in Rivers State, what should typically be what body should be the lawmaking body in Rivers State? Is the National Assembly empowered to step in, since the House of Assembly, the State House of Assembly, has also been temporarily suspended?
Of course, it's National Assembly, yes. Where the Assembly in circumstances like this, even without the president making a proclamation, assuming without considering that while the crisis was still on, they are unable to sit, and the Assembly can invoke its powers and take over the functions. They can do everything, including passing budgets, approving appointments, and all that. The only power you can exercise under the Constitution for House Assembly of a state is to impeach a governor of a state. That's the only power that the House Assembly cannot exercise in circumstances where it takes over the functions, duties, powers of the House Assembly of a state created under Section 90 of the 1999 Constitution. So yes, at the moment, in the absence of the House Assembly, which has been suspended with the governor and the deputy governor, the National Assembly is the only viable locale under the Constitution to present the budget of Rivers State.
All right, there are worries that this implication is going to have a far-reaching effect. Does the president's action, doesn't it undermine Nigeria's federal structure and the autonomy of states? And I'd also like you to touch on the fact that Many are still wondering how the sole administrator is accountable when it comes to spending, monies that belong to the state. Yes, we do know that the case is in court. That's the case of the legality of having him as a sole administrator. That's in court. But the aspect of his operation as the sole administrator of the state and also spending in terms of allocation and so on, how can he be held accountable in terms of the law?
Well, the National Assembly, you recall, has the power oversight over the federal government. So when the federal government are thinking about the power of administering river states, the National Assembly were exercising functional oversight over the same states. So in terms of expenditure from this budget, again, the National Assembly has set up committees, you recall, on river states and emergency rules. So those committees will now exercise the power oversight for both chambers of National Assembly, and as time will allow, sometimes the House plenary might discuss river states. So that question about oversighting monitoring what happens to the budget is taken care of vis-a-vis the fact that they already exercising functions and set of committees to oversee river states. So, but as to whether or not this is an encroachment to the space of states, of the mining states, I would hazard an argument. Even though I've said that because the matters are subject to this, I'll be minded not to discuss propriety or the rights of the takeover. But however, the Constitution guarantees for democratically elected administrations. Remember, if you go to Section 1, sub 1, I think, or thereabouts of the Constitution, it provides for only the means to administer the federation or any part thereof shall be as prescribed by this Constitution. In other words, it does not for any moment envisage that a democracy can be suspended. You call also that under President Goodluck Jonathan, one had crisis in the Northeast. So much that they have to declare marching rule in 3 states, I think Yobe, Borno, and the Adamawa states. The governors were left in office, while even the House of Assembly were left in office, while the marching rule continued until it was called off. However, in the wisdom of the president in River State, in the case of River State, what we saw was a sweeping takeover. And like I said, the matters are sub judice, so let's allow the courts to handle that until they make a determination of those cases. We may not be able to make statements as to whether or not the president was right or wrong.
Okay, I'm about to ask you another court-related question, but this won't be sub judice. I would like to know the implications, but let me go straight to my question. As we speak, the PDP Governors Forum has taken the federal government to court over the declaration of a state of emergency in River State. We're not trying to preempt the outcome, but either way, what will be the implication of the judgment on Nigeria's democracy? Would it have any effect on the ongoing situation in River State?
I'll tell you something. Sometimes I'm an advocate for judicial activism. I believe that our laws should be tested. We run a system of 3 parts. There's the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. I believe that all the 3 arms, all the 3 parts of government should function. So when the legislature made a law, and the executive has executed the law, the judiciary should be able to interpret the laws. So I do not find anything wrong with what's happening in courts. The president acted on the provision of the Constitution as Section 305. That's a creation of parliament, as it were. Now, the jury is called upon to test the question whether or not the president was wrong. So in terms of implications, whenever the courts come up with an analysis, if the president had not called off, and remember the proclamation for Mexico was 6 months. So if the president had not called it off, 6 months lapses, and they say, Mr. President, you're wrong, that is it. The court will have simply interpreted the Constitution the way it is according to its powers under Section 6. The courts have judicial powers of the Federation. So I think that for purposes of growing our democracy and enriching our jurisprudence, it's important that actions of government, of course, that the Constitution have declared that every institution, person authority, including the president, is subject to this Constitution. So all of the actions of the National Assembly and that can't be vetted by the courts, which have the judicial powers of federation. So whatever they come as verdicts with to make determination of the issues laid before them by the parties, not only the PDP Governors Forum. I think for Rivers State, there are some groups and there are some individuals who have filed actions in court, like I mentioned to you. Yesterday, one of the parties was in court and got the news that the president, so the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court, Justice John Soho, had invoked another of the Federal High Court under civil procedure rules to move all the matters concerning the emergency rule filed in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, to Abuja. And so it matters to continue from that point. What was the reason? We didn't know. Maybe as time goes on, we'll know. But we understand that the Attorney General's name was mentioned, and I don't know whether he was the one that asked the CJF Federal Court to invoke that power. But I'm not the litigant in the matter, so we're following closely. But I have no problem whatsoever with people, citizens exercising their powers or their constitutional rights to challenge actions of government. Remember, it's a democracy, so government must be held accountable. So if people are in court challenging actions of government, they are valid in order, and the courts must have the courage to speak to the facts, speak to the law, and so can move forward.
All right, let's move away from the legality or illegality of these actions. Like you said, they've been in court. But there are those who believe that it's beyond it being a constitutional necessity, but it's a political tool, this intervention and this budget presentation. And I want to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think so. Remember, I said that the Supreme Court have nullified the budget that was passed for 2025 by the governor of Rivers State. That's a fact. I'm sure you're aware of that fact. So if the president appointed an administrator who is working in place of the governor, and if the same National Assembly had approved that emergency rule declaration by the president, which was gazetted, are taken over the function as Assembly of the state, it's important that the state must be funded. Recall that we have institutions there. There are schools, there are hospitals, there are security issues, and the business of governance must go on. So if there's no budget, how would they fund it? So beyond the political rhetoric, people should understand that the reality before us is that emergency rule in the Rivers State since March 18, and until it is called off or nullified by the courts. That's what we have as a reality for us. And so the government cannot operate in vacuum. There must be budgeting and there must be expenditure. So what the president has done is pursuant to, I don't see the propriety of bringing the politics of the argument to it now, particularly because remember that the government has bills to pay. It will be unheard of that an intervention was made by the federal government to stabilize Rivers State from the cantankerous politics we have been engulfed in the last nearly 2 years now, and that will now multiply unrest by not having government pay salaries, run hospitals, service security agencies, and all of those, and then all the projects that we're having initiated by the government of South-South or inherited by him from previous governments are grounded. So government is run on money, and you cannot appropriate, so they cannot spend government funds without appropriation. Remember, I said the Supreme Court have nullified the budget passed by the Assembly for the governor for 2025. So the administrator cannot operate without a budget. So within the context of this argument, I think it's safe to say that the National Assembly is now having the ball in our court to pass the budget for the state that was sent to it by the president, and then of course go further to do her proper oversight duties. But as first of all, let's say it. We may not be comfortable, a lot of people are not comfortable, I am not so comfortable, and this is my personal opinion, that we'll have the constitution suspended. But we're clearly watching how this pans out. Expenditures for Rivers State should be for Rivers people, and that doesn't mean that outsiders are excluded from doing business here. But like every other state in the federation, you just played the clip now before the program began. There were allocations that were being debated in the National Assembly over the some objection raised by senators from the Southeast over the allocation to the Southeast. These are the issues. We're in a federation where the component units have interest to protect, and once the interests are under some kind of threat of erosion, people are bound to raise eyebrows. So in the case of Rivers State, it's not different. People are asking for stability to return, so we have a proper state in our hands and hold our people accountable. But in the meantime, until that happens, The administrator must be held accountable and be seen to be held accountable by National Assembly. So it does not go to support the script that is out there in the streets that this is some kind of state capture or hijack of the government of Rivers State as worked by the federal government. There must be accountability, and National Assembly now has a function to do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning concerning this very interesting, and we could say very, very interesting story once again. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Sogbeye Eli, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.